Welcome. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channels. We try to build this bad boy up. Packers on the road, West Coast, Sunday Night Football at Seattle. It is Packers, Seahawks. Final thoughts before Sunday night's clash. Two teams that right now not only are in the playoffs, if the playoffs started right now, but two teams that would face each other wild card weekend at the same venue. If the playoffs started today, it would be Green Bay at Seattle. Seahawks are rolling, winners of 4 straight. Just an interesting tidbit I saw. Green Bay, for the 3rd straight week, will be playing an opponent that's on a win streak of at least 3 games. Beat Miami on Thanksgiving, lost last week at Detroit. Now you get Seattle, who's won 4 in a row. And it's been an impressive stretch for Seattle. 3 of the 4 wins against division rivals. They've beaten Arizona twice, who Arizona's a feisty bunch. So they've beaten the Cardinals twice in the last 4 weeks, and a win at San Francisco that I think surprised a lot of people. I think that was a sort of a line drawn in the sand moment where a lot of people thought, okay, the 49ers are going to take control of the NFC West. This was 4 weeks ago, and the 49ers are going to win at home. They're going to beat Seattle, and they're going to start to go on a roll. Instead, it's been, up until the win against Chicago last week, going in the exact opposite direction for the 49ers. That win on the road for Seattle 4 weeks ago against San Francisco was one of those moments where I think more people afterwards started to take notice, like, whoa, the NFC West is truly wide open. With that win that Seattle had. And winning 3 of 4 against division teams, and 3 of the 4 have been on the road. There's a win sprinkled in there at Aaron Rodgers and at the New York Jets for the Seahawks. They're playing good football. They really are. And I just found it interesting that the Packers are starting to face teams, and next week that will come to an end when they face New Orleans on Monday Night Football. But this will be the 3rd week in a row they're playing a team that's really finding a groove and finding some momentum. I mentioned, too, you almost have to start with the fact that this could be a legitimate first-round wildcard weekend playoff matchup. Seattle is trending towards that NFC West crown. If you believe in the term and the phrasing like controlling your own destiny, if Seattle wins its last 4 games, they are the NFC West winner. Green Bay right now, you kind of look at the landscape of the wildcard picture because the North is out of the realm of possibilities for Green Bay at this stage. It's almost like I don't see them falling to the 7th seed. You look at Green Bay's schedule, you have at Seattle, at Minnesota, and at home against New Orleans, at home against Chicago. Not in that order, but 2 on the road, 2 at home. If Green Bay has to beat Chicago the last week of the regular season, if their seeding hasn't been decided, I think they win that game. I definitely think they beat the Saints next week on Monday Night Football. And then it's basically like, can you get 1 of 2 on the road at Seattle, at Minnesota, win 3 of 4 to end the year? You do that, Washington's not going to leapfrog you, but you're also 2 behind Minnesota right now. You get another crack at them, but the Vikings are the 5 seed at this current moment, and they're 2 ahead of Green Bay and beat them in the only head-to-head so far this season. So point being, right now, things are trending towards Green Bay being the 6th seed, and there is a likelihood that they could face Seattle in the first round if it is the Seahawks, who are crowned NFC West champions. But neither team, with a month to go, has like anything wrapped up. And point in bringing that up is that there's no scenario in this game on Sunday night where either team's going to be saying like, "Hey, let's bury this in case we want to show it for the first time in a playoff game against Seattle." And Seattle's not thinking, hey, let's not show this in case we get the Packers on wildcard weekend. I can't imagine there's any of that going on in the minds of the head coaches for this matchup, Mike McDonald in Seattle, and of course, Matt LaFleur in Green Bay. I think it's too far out to try to project and predict those sorts of things. And when neither team does at the current moment have a playoff spot wrapped up, you push that thought and idea even farther out, because I did see it floating around on social media like, man, maybe the Packers shouldn't empty the clip against Seattle in case they meet up with them in the playoffs at some point. You can't really think that way. You got to get a ticket to the dance first. And while it seems exceedingly likely that Green Bay at a minimum will be a playoff team, you can't count on that before you see the little star next to their name on the website signaling that they have indeed clinched a playoff spot. Yeah, it'll be hard to leapfrog Minnesota. Likewise, I think it'll be hard for Washington to try to leapfrog Green Bay. We'll have to see. Seattle, as I was doing my case study on them, I'll be honest, I've only seen the Seahawks, I think, 3 times, like 3 full games this year, so not a whole hell of a lot. They're a very fascinating team for many reasons. They give up 14.8 points per game in its wins. So when Seattle wins, their defense is suffocating you. They're getting to the quarterback, forcing turnovers, and playing with an abundant amount of confidence. Again, in its wins, Seattle is giving up 14.8 points per game. In its losses, the Seahawks are giving up 32.8. I mean, that's a big, big discrepancy compared to wins and losses. And the 32.8, you can point to like, well, they've played Buffalo, they've played Detroit, and I get all that. And, they played the Rams and lost in overtime 26-20. They also gave up 29 to the Giants in a loss. Like, it's not all playoff contenders or playoff-heavy teams. There's been a head-scratcher in there, especially with that game against the Giants where the Seahawks yielded 29 points. And so they're giving up a little less than 15 in their wins, and the Seahawks are yielding nearly 33 in their losses. And you look at Green Bay, offense starting to hum. Take out those first 3 drives against Detroit last Thursday night. Green Bay scored at least 30 points in its last 3 games. And so you kind of have a clashing of styles here where the Seahawks are rolling. They've won 4 in a row, 3 against NFC West teams. They're holding opponents to less than 15 in their wins so far this year. Green Bay, meanwhile, even in a loss last week at Detroit, put up 31 on the scoreboard, and Green Bay has posted at least 30 in its last 3 games. And so we'll see what kind of budges and what gives in this matchup on Sunday night, or if there's a compromise, if there's a middle ground in this game where Green Bay finds itself maybe somewhere in between 14 and 30 at 23, 24 points. We'll just have to wait and see. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Final thoughts, Packers, Seahawks, Sunday Night Football in a standalone game. If you haven't seen much of Seattle this year, you might know this if you get into fantasy football, but Jackson Smith-Njigba, the first-round pick, second-year wide receiver out of Ohio State, he's the guy to circle in this offense and in this passing game. Years past, it's been DK Metcalf. It's been sort of a share between Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, the veteran slot wide receiver. This year, it is Jackson Smith-Njigba getting the looks from Geno Smith, getting fed early, getting fed often. And if you want to do a simplistic breakdown of the numbers, JSN leads Seattle in targets with 102, receptions with 75, yards with 911, and receiving touchdowns with 5. Again, JSN leading Seattle in targets, receptions, yards, touchdowns. And I was looking at the reception totals. He's got 75. DK's got somewhere around 50, I think it was when I looked. So it's not like it's been that close. Like JSN is the leader in the clubhouse for this wide receiver room. And the reason it's so fascinating is because of the name recognition besides JSN with DK and with the veteran Lockett. It's a really solid, stout group of wide receivers that Geno Smith has to work with in Seattle. And DK's still good. And I don't mean a disservice to him in any sense by saying this, but you watch Seattle, and I'm watching Jackson Smith-Njigba these last few weeks, especially where I think he's gone for at least 60 yards, was it, or 65 yards in 4 straight games or 5 straight games. It's something like that. DK Metcalf is almost a secondary piece right now in the passing game, and the reason that makes defenses cringe is because DK is a good wide receiver. And so if DK is the second option in this group, that is absolute nightmare fuel for a Green Bay secondary that has its fair share of injuries right now. Javon Bullard listed as week to week. Evan Williams in concussion protocol. I believe he was a limited participant at practice on Wednesday. And Jair back at full practice on Wednesday. We'll get to that in a few minutes. But given how things have gone with Jair, who the hell knows if he's going to be out there on Sunday night or in what capacity for Green Bay. It is a really, really good wide receiver core for Seattle, led by the second-year wideout in JSN. If Jair is out Sunday night, it's scary hours for Green Bay. It really is. You saw the likes of Tim Patrick go off last week for Detroit. Amon-Ra did his thing. They get the running backs involved in the passing game. Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs had a receiving touchdown. Jamison Williams, like the talent overall, like Detroit's just a better team. They might be the best team in the NFL, but if you look strictly at the wide receiver room, Seattle's pretty damn good. They've got a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of different options. And so if 2-3's not out there for Green Bay and you're having to put like Stokes on DK Metcalf, yeah, I don't like that matchup for Green Bay. I don't. If you're having, in the slot even with Bullard out and you slide Keyshawn over there, and if they have JSN in the slot, like to me that I like Keyshawn. He's a pit bull. He's a dog, but to me that favors JSN. I think the availability of 2-3, and I mentioned this in a video last week, I'm more so looking big picture for the Packers. You need 2-3, Jair Alexander healthy for the playoffs, and being that star cornerback to rely on, because without him, it's a really, really thin cornerback room for Green Bay. And so if he misses Sunday night, obviously not great. Green Bay could have its hands full. We'll just have to wait and see on that front. You got to remember, too, Geno Smith, as much as I love Geno Smith's story, starts his career off slowly and doesn't have much around him in New York, doesn't have stability. You're talking whether it's coaching, the front office, ownership, like how many quarterbacks. It's a revolving door, really, for both New York teams. It's been a revolving door at quarterback for years and years now. Giants obviously date back to Eli, the last time they had stability. The Jets, I don't know when the hell you think they last had stability at the quarterback position, like Mark Sanchez, even though he wasn't like a star quarterback. I don't know. But Geno, story's awesome. I love that he's gotten a second life, a second chance in the NFL. It took a few years, but he's a good quarterback. I think he can elevate guys around him. If nothing else, he will be a gunslinger. Like Geno Smith will take his shots, he'll take his chances. And to me, that shows the confidence he has in his arm, but also in his pass catchers. And I think that does help with the rapport that he has with his guys. But he'll throw you a cookie. Like Geno Smith will absolutely have some interceptions where if you're a Seahawks fan, you're like, what was the thought process on that one? He'll really, really try to thread the needle at times. He has the third most amount of interceptions this year with 12. He's also been sacked the third most of any quarterback, 40 times this year for Geno Smith. And so Green Bay's pass rush, especially when only rushing 4, has had its issues. Like if I'm banking in on one of those things to hit home Sunday night for Green Bay, it's the interceptions. We saw it early in the year. Green Bay was forcing turnovers of the opposition at a very high rate. It has since dipped off, but this is a quarterback that'll throw you a cookie or two. And so if I'm saying what's more likely on Sunday night, Geno Smith throws 2 interceptions or even 1, or the Packers get 5 or 6 sacks, the sacks have been lacking so much, regardless of opponent, really outside of the Tennessee game way back early in the year. I'm thinking Green Bay, even if Jair's out, we know Bullard's out, even if Evan Williams can't go, I'm going to rely on that Packers secondary and really that defense to still be able to force a turnover or two, given how we have seen Geno Smith. Third most interceptions with 12 this year. And so if one of those departments hits home for Green Bay, I think they're more likely to get an interception or two than they are to pile up the sacks. And it's an offensive line that's been vulnerable for Seattle, but again, Green Bay just haven't done it. Haven't even, done it on any sort of consistent basis. We've at least seen them intercept quarterbacks at a consistent rate, albeit back in September and October again before it tailed off. So that's the one thing I like about in this matchup for Green Bay. There should be opportunities, whether it's Xavier McKinney patrolling the secondary, or even Keyshawn Nixon, who had one of Jared Goff last week. Maybe Carrington Valentine gets his name in the interception department. There should be some opportunities for Green Bay against Geno Smith. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please, please, please click the subscribe button if you haven't already. Packers coming off a loss against Detroit, trying to get that sour taste out of its mouth. Do we like that Green Bay had the extra rest between games? Because I asked that question, and I know the very, very simple, easy answer is, well, yeah, you get more time to rest, heal, recover before you go out to a West Coast trip. But I do think sometimes when there's a heavily built-up matchup. All losses count the same, but they don't all feel the same. They really don't. This one stung, 34-31 on the road last week against Detroit. The Packers now 1-6 against the Lions in their last 7 meetups with the Motor City Kitties. And so I'm wondering, a game that was so heavily built up, it was a standalone game on Thursday night. The easy answer is to say, the rest, the recovery, the time to recoup, all great for Green Bay. And I agree. But a loss like that, mentally, you hope it doesn't linger and stick in Green Bay's minds too long. That would be my concern. How quickly were they able to watch the tape, assess what went wrong, how do we get better moving forward, and turn that page? Because I still saw some guys 3-4 days after the game talking about Detroit. That would be my concern, is that if it was a Sunday game against Detroit and then a Sunday game against Seattle, you have no choice but to flip the page quickly and get ready for the next opponent. The fact that they could kind of sit in this loss a few extra days, you hope it's a mental thing. I know physically having the extra days to prepare is great, and from a strategic standpoint, it's great. You get those extra 3 days from a Thursday game compared to a Sunday to get ready for the Seahawks and lay out a blueprint. Mentally, though, I think it's such a big part of all of this. I hope they were able to wipe the sour taste out of their mouths and just get ready for the Seahawks and now have that laser focus back in on Seattle and not what Lions players are saying on Twitter and on social media, because there were some back and forth. I saw with Jamison Williams, Jaden Reed on Instagram, Kirby Joseph won't shut the hell up on Twitter. You just hope the Packers mentally are over that hurdle, because I didn't like that a few days after the game, there were some Packers players still bringing up the Detroit game. You got to focus in on Seattle. Seattle's not – there's no layups in the NFL. There really aren't. And Seattle is far from that, far from that for Green Bay. And so I think it's easy to say, the extra days off, perfect. That's what we want for Green Bay. But mentally, I hope they've gotten over that hurdle after the loss to Detroit. And, playing in Seattle – on the West Coast, never easy. Green Bay hasn't won in Seattle since 2008, but it's not like an every year occurrence. They haven't played in Seattle since 2018, but still haven't won there since 2008. I'm not gonna bring up the game that we all remember. I'm not even gonna bring it up, but a few years ago, more than a few years ago, we all remember the game in Seattle. There's really 2 of them. The one I'll bring up because it wasn't in the postseason. The Fail Mary, that I was in college when the Fail Mary happened. I remember watching that game in my dorm room, and not a good stretch there. Not a good stretch of days following the Fail Mary, but there have been some, I guess I could just say Seattle at times for Green Bay has been a house of horrors. And it has been for a lot of teams, but you're talking gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, soul-crushing losses that the Packers have had in Seattle. I'll leave it at that, but haven't won there since 2008. You'd like to rectify that on Sunday night if you're the Packers. Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Overall, I told you I've only seen Seattle really start to finish 3 times. So if there's Seahawks fans that want to chime in the comments, I'm perfectly open to that, because what I say certainly isn't the gospel. But from a Packers fan perspective, what do you make of Seattle? And certainly not trying to disrespect them. I think I'm more concerned with it being a trip out west, playing in that stadium, and I know the heartbreaking losses were not in the LaFleur era or with any of these guys on the team, right? Like Jordan Love wasn't a member of the Packers for any of those, Xavier McKinney, any of them, just name them. They weren't a part of those soul-crushing losses that the Packers have experienced in Seattle. But for me, I think I'm more concerned about Green Bay going out west, playing in that stadium, the 12th man as it's known and well known. That crowd is loud. That crowd can get in your head pretty easily. And, won't be surprised if the Packers or other teams have to go with a silent count at points. It can get that loud in Seattle. But I do think I'm more worried about it being all the way out on the West Coast, that stadium, a house of horrors, so on and so forth, more so than the team itself, like how it's currently constructed. And I know that might come across as a slap in the face to the Seahawks roster. They're a good team, but don't get me wrong, Seattle's good, and what McDonald's doing in year one, they're in a position to win the NFC West. It's awesome. You get the hat tip for sure. Seattle, to me, just doesn't... They don't have that overwhelming sentiment, and this is going to come off as very arrogant for a Packers fan to say, but they don't have that, oh no, the Seahawks are up on the schedule. Like, they're a really good team, and maybe I just am so brainwashed after the Detroit game last week, but based off how Detroit's been against Green Bay lately, 1-6, the Packers' record against the Lions in the last 7. When I saw Detroit, I was like, oh shit, here it's the Lions again. I think Green Bay can win, absolutely, but it hasn't really worked out against the Lions under LaFleur in the last few years. Seattle, I think for me, it's more the stadium and everything around the roster more so than it is the roster, and it's a pretty good roster. But I don't know, Geno Smith, 14 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. He has a knack for throwing you a bone a couple of times. He's being sacked a lot. The defense in their losses has given up nearly 33 points per game, so they've shown that vulnerability. I just get a different, it's not Buffalo or Kansas City, who Green Bay beat last year, or Detroit. I do feel differently about Seattle. Quite frankly, if the Packers were in the NFC West, they'd be in first place right now. And so I didn't have the thought of oh God, the Seahawks, this roster is incredibly intimidating. They have great players, but it's more so the everything around it. Stadium, the trip, all that stuff that worries me more for the Packers. On the injury front, Mitch, I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. On the injury front, big name as far as it's a name that just hasn't been brought up in months after the ankle surgery. Luke Musgrave back at practice doing individual drills on Wednesday. I would be stunned if he played Sunday. The window's open for them being the Packers to bring him back in the next few weeks. I would be very, very, very surprised if he was active and playing Sunday for the Packers. But another piece to have in the equation, Musgrave, remember, he was taken ahead of Tucker Kraft at the same position last year in the NFL draft by the Packers. Musgrave was the second-round pick out of Oregon State, supposed to be the vertical threat, the lanky, rangy tight end that Green Bay could stretch the field with. He hasn't been that for the Packers consistently, but it's been injuries. He's had 2 major, major injuries in his first 2 seasons that have wiped anything out. But I will say, when Musgrave was healthy at the beginning of this year, it did not take long for the Packers to show us all, really in the snap count totals, Tucker Kraft's the guy. Tucker Kraft's the number 1 tight end. This is not a situation where Luke Musgrave's going to come back, and even when he is put on the active roster and he's got the pads and the helmet on and he's ready to go, he's not going to even have a 50-50 split of the snaps with Tucker Kraft. And it's not because he's coming back from injury. It's because Tucker Kraft has just emerged as the guy. And again, go back and look. When Musgrave was healthy before this injury, the first, month and a half, 2 months of the season, go look at snap count totals, go look at targets, receptions. It became very apparent Green Bay, Tucker Kraft's the number 1 tight end. And Green Bay was right in having that assumption because Tucker Kraft has developed now into one of the best young tight ends in the National Football League. And so when Musgrave comes back, it gives you another option. It gives you another piece. It gives you a different look at tight end. Because remember when Kraft was drafted, it was this is a blocking tight end who you can use as a check down option. And even at South Dakota State, Tucker Kraft was a yak monster. He's continued to be a yak monster, way more than a check down option for Green Bay. Now, really, this passing game, you can't trust anyone on a week-to-week basis because, again, there's just so many mouths to feed. And Romeo Doubs could be coming back Sunday as well. He's missed the last couple of outings for the Packers. But Tucker Kraft has emerged as a pretty steady constant in this offense for the Packers. And so when Musgrave does get back, again, I don't think it's this Sunday. It's not going to be on a 50-50 timeshare with Tucker Kraft. I would still expect it, honestly, maybe 75-25 at best for Musgrave. But he is I'm not giving up on Musgrave. That's not the point of what I'm trying to say. I still think there's a ton of potential that's untapped with Luke Musgrave. First thing for him, he's got to stay healthy. Health is wealth. Availability is the best ability sometimes. Use either of those cheesy lines. It's fine. Musgrave's got to stay on the field first. and then we'll see how it shakes out. But Tucker Kraft is the clear-cut number one, but it's great to see Musgrave back at practice. And if that gives you another piece, another thing that defenses have to worry about in preparation for Green Bay is the postseason years. Awesome. Tremendous. All for it. The other one, Jair Alexander, that I mentioned, full participant on Wednesday after being a limited participant all last week in the lead up to the Detroit game and then ultimately not playing against the Lions. They need Jair for the playoffs. They could desperately use him for this specific matchup against a Seahawks team that has a really, really good wide receiver group that I alluded to earlier. But if Jair can't go against the Seahawks, I'm not going to be overly flustered and pissed off because I keep thinking if Green Bay really wants to make a run in the NFC, if you want that third matchup with Detroit to potentially take them out and make a run to New Orleans in February, they need Jair healthy. And you can say, well, he's not even playing at an all-pro level and blah, blah, blah. It's because of what they have when Jair isn't in the lineup that makes him so valuable. There is no Rasul Douglas. Rasul Douglas is gone. I love Keyshawn Nixon. I loved the rookie version of Carrington Valentine. I think he's getting better as he's getting more reps this year, but they need Jair Alexander. They just do because of what they are without him. That's the kicker. I'm not saying Jair needs to come back and be an all-pro and lock down the number one wide receiver. That'd be great if he did that for the stretch run of this season and then the playoffs. But they just need him back because of what we know he can be when he's healthy and what we know they don't have when he's out. And that is what they do have is a very, very thin cornerback room. And a cornerback room that, I hate saying it because I said in a video last week, you're forced to play Eric Stokes heavy snaps when Jair's not in, and he's proven time and again this year he's just not that guy, and it sucks because he was that guy as a rookie, and then injuries just derailed the career of Eric Stokes, at least, up to this point. And maybe there's some sort of switch that can get flipped for Stokes. I don't see it at this point. So they need Jair back, but if he's out Sunday, it's not the end of the world. I'm more so thinking big picture with Jair. It is a big one on Sunday night, though. Packers-Seahawks potential wild card playoff preview. We'll have to see how that pans out. And the game in itself on Sunday night. It is Mitch. I'm on YouTube. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Always appreciate all the support. We'll see you next time.